There we are, Chair. You are live.
So, bore da pawb, good morning everybody and welcome to the Economy, Residents and Community Scrutiny Committee today, Wednesday the 11th of February. I'm Councillor Angela Davis, the Chair for the committee, and we have our committee members, some portfolio holders and officers with us today, and we'll introduce those as we go along. So the first item on our agenda is any apologies for today's meeting.
Good morning, Councillor Angela. You have apologies from Cabinet members, Councillor Matthew Dorrance and Councillor Rafe Devlin, and from officers Catherine James, Clive Pinney, Ellen Sullivan, Jane Thomas, Jenny Ashton, Paul Bradshaw.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. And item 2 is any disclosures of interest. So this is to receive disclosures of interest by members relating to items to be considered at this meeting. So we've got no hands up, so that's excellent. Item 3 is the declarations of party whips, and this is to receive disclosures of prohibited party whips which a member has been given in relation to the meeting in accordance with section 78.3 of the local government measure. And members are reminded that under section 78, members having been given a prohibited party whip cannot vote on any matter before this committee. Any disclosures? Nope. They shouldn't be, so that's grand. Thank you very much. So item 4 on the agenda is our scrutiny recommendations. So members, we have recommendations returned or responded to from 2 meetings. The first one was our meeting of the 2nd of December 2025, and this was on the strategic sites for economic development. And you'll see there in the minutes we made 7 recommendations and all of those were accepted. So thank you very much to officers and portfolio holders for taking their comments and recommendations on board. There was just one thing that we mentioned in recommendation 3. We talked about having a crib sheet for members if we were to go out into the community and sort of promote these business locations. But members thought it would be useful if we had a crib sheet, and I wonder, had some thought been given to that? And is it something that could be developed going forward? I think it was Diane we talked to.
Shall I come in on that?
Yes,
Chair?
please do.
Which is to say that I haven't picked up that direct issue with officers, and I'd be happy to pick that up outside the meeting. Just with regards to engaging with town and community councils, because I think this is a sort of key part of this recommendation.
Yes, that's right.
I just wanted to say that the next round of Sustainable Paris Town and Community Council meetings will involve us taking our economic strategy forward to those town and community councils and asking for their feedback on the strategy. And so I just wanted to say to the committee, thank you very much for the recommendation. We've taken it on board, and the next round of meetings will be engaging directly with those town and community councils about that document.
Oh, well, that would be excellent. That probably supersede the need for that crib sheet then, because members will have the system explained. Thank you very much for that, Councillor Preston. Right, and the next set of minutes we've got here are from our... Yes, sorry, Peter. Yes, apologies. You've got your hand up.
No, that's right, no problem. It was just a quick comment, actually, just building off the back of what the portfolio holder said there, and understand his point going forward. It was just in that recommendation. It was just my experience where it says the economy team already works closely with town councils. I've not really experienced that from a new town in Lancashire and town council perspective. So, yeah, hopefully things will improve going forwards, but I've not experienced that in the past.
Okay.
Can I push back on that, Chair? Which is just to say that I met with Councillor Lewington, having assumed the portfolio before Christmas, and have been in contact with him about some of the issues that he raised. So I hope that they can be resolved outside of this meeting. But I know that the Transforming Towns team work incredibly hard across many of our towns across the county, and I know that they engage very well with our town and community councils.
And hopefully those meetings that the town and community council meetings, if our directors are going to be attending those will help to relay Peter's concerns. So thank you for highlighting that as well. Okay, so I want to move on. The second set of minutes was from the 6th of January. This was the impact of delivered budget savings. So members, we didn't do so well there. We made 5 recommendations, only 2 of which have been accepted. And I think perhaps here there is a little note to ourselves here, because one of our concerns was about the quality of the impact assessments. And there's been some pushback on that, but basically we should have brought it up during the meeting itself. So I think there's a note to ourselves there that we need to provide more robust scrutiny at the time on those impact assessments. So I suppose every day is an education, and we've all got to strive hard to improve. So unless anybody's got any comments on either of those sets of minutes or any further questions. Councillor Gary?
Yeah, just as a second observation, obviously some of them have come back because it wasn't necessarily the right scrutiny to bring that point up. It could have been in a finance one for some of them. That's a fair argument. But I guess we need officers to nudge us and remind us of that at that time. But if the scrutiny for the previous finance session has already happened and we or others in finance scrutiny haven't picked it up, then I do think there's justification for us to ask and for it to be considered, not just to say it should have been picked up elsewhere, because it may not have been. So that's just one pushback. And the other one on the sort of performance against statutory duties, it is one we struggle with, and that's why it was sort of raised. We don't always understand what's a statutory duty, and our constituents and our general members of the public often don't either. And actually having a relatively clear performance indicator against our statutory duties, I think would be really worthwhile, because we have to make sure that we're not spending extraordinary amounts of money on non-statutory stuff if our statutory duties aren't compliant. Surely we have that duty to do. So we've made recommendation, it's gone and the recommendations come back. Can't change that, but I think just like to make that quite clear that actually I think we should be reporting against our statutory duty, even if it takes time to do so.
Okay, so would you like to put forward a note back, Gary, or just to note it in the minutes and something for us to be aware of?
I don't think we can do that. I think we just note it in the minutes. That's we've tried to do what we're asked to do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Peter
Thanks,
Lewington.
Chair. Yeah, just a quick one. I won't labour it too much, but yes, I totally agree with Councillor Gary's points there, and I would support what he's saying in your suggestion as well, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Peter. Right, okay, so then we move on to our substantive item today, item 6 on the agenda, and we have got a request for this to go into confidential session. I'll read the statement and then, Councillor David, did you want to come in at this point?
Yeah.
Yes, Kath.
Just very briefly, Chair, with regard to the statutory duties. There's already significant controls in place around governance, particularly with the quarterly service performance reviews, where the actual performance review actually goes through all statutory duties that actually apply to that service. The one thing I would request is that obviously if there is a question at any scrutiny committee with regard to statutory delivery, then if the question is asked there, then officers or myself could undoubtedly, give confirmation as to whether that's being complied with or not. But I think what the response is actually getting at is that already there's significant work being done within existing governance around statutory requirements.
Thank you, Councillor David. And I must just take us back one step. I do this every time. Apologies, committee. I need you all to agree that you're happy with those minutes. We need a show of hands there for the record. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Apologies, Kath, Gemma. Right, so now we can move on to that confidential item. So the monitoring officer has determined that category 3 of the access to information procedures rules applies to the following items. His view on the public interest test, having taken into account the provision of rule 14.8 of the council's access to information rules, was that to make this information public would disclose information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. These factors, in his view, outweigh the public interest in disclosing this information. Members are asked to consider these factors when determining the public interest tests, which they must decide when considering to exclude the public from this part of the meeting. So, members, your thoughts on this? Your concerns? Are we happy to go into confidential session? Councillor Gary.
I don't think that explanation gives me satisfaction of the reasons why we deem this to be in a private session, if I'm honest at all. I think if an officer who maybe supported that, no, Clive's not here, could give us a verbal reasoning why, that might help us.
Yep.
I can understand there will be some financial information in the packs that we might not want to publish and might create some elements of concern, but to put the whole session into confidential session really worries me.
Okay, I think, would it be appropriate to ask our portfolio holder, or actually it's Daniel's report, if you'd like to sort of put forward to us why you feel it should go into confidential session?
Yeah, Councillor Charlton, do you want to come back first on that one?
No, I'll leave it to you. I have asked the same question, Chair, and I'm not sure whether we had an updated referral for that yesterday. I'd be happy for the officers to come back to me, because I did ask the same question.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm happy to answer this question. Yeah, thank you, Chair. The reason requested confidential session on this one is essentially that there's extensive financial and other sensitive data around individual council buildings, which was considered confidential and inappropriate for publication or discussion in the public domain. So that's the justification that was put forward.
Yeah, so that is one of the appendices then, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Councillor Shan.
Thank you, Councillor Angela. I would like to make a request that we have a look at, not for today, obviously there isn't enough time today, but I'm really deeply concerned that so much of this is not being discussed in the public domain. And I do understand that some of the papers contain information that couldn't be, but also a lot of those papers could have been shared with the public and could have been discussed today in public session. And I wonder if, with a little bit more planning and foresight, we could have organised this meeting so that part of it was in confidential session and part of it was open to the public. And it does take me on to a sort of slightly different but related point, which is there was an enormous amount of information, hundreds and hundreds of pages of papers, all of it really interesting, which I personally think a lot of the public would be really interested in, really setting out the wide context that of this that the council is grappling with. I personally have not been able to do it justice in the time since the papers were published, and I wonder whether we can do it justice in one scrutiny meeting. So I would like to request that we have another meeting to explore it further, but also maybe a members' workshop. It's such a huge subject. It's probably the most important challenge we face, not just as a council, but as a species. And I think we need to be according it the time that its importance merits.
Thank you, Councillor Shan. Yeah, and that was raised, wasn't it, in our pre-meeting? I can see I've got Councillor Liz, Councillor Gary and Councillor Peter Lewington, but I'm going to bring, if you don't mind, Diane Reynolds in. Would you like to speak, Diane? Explain it to us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Yes, so in the original papers that we prepared for Scrutiny Committee, we didn't provide all of the underlying data, and when those papers came through to you, it was deemed that there wasn't enough information that you could actually meaningfully scrutinise all of the information. So we added all of that relatively short time frame before the papers needed to be published, we could defer the session and redact the elements that can't go into the public session, and you could go into public session, but noting that there are still a huge amount of information available to you that would still need to be scrutinised. Or, as you suggest, we could go into member sessions in terms of looking at different parts of it. But I also want to kind of note as well that we have a climate and nature steering group of members who have also gone through a lot of this information in a wider context than scrutiny. But I don't think that should stop you as a scrutiny in your role as being able to scrutinise all of the evidence. So I'll be led by yourselves as scrutiny how you want to proceed. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to slightly push back on that, Diane, because the original paper put forward at the time of publishing, and remember it came to us very late, was just the presentation. And a presentation is not a scrutiny session. A presentation is a member development, and that was fed back to you. I understand then the report came along with all the papers. My concern is the relevant information required for this committee should be in the paper. We scrutinise the paper that you put forward to us, and all the rest of that information is, yes, to dive into for information, but I do think it would have been more conducive and more worthwhile to have had that as a member development, so you could take us through those papers and explain the challenges and the work that's gone on to head, because it's clear that a lot of work has gone on, and it is, as Councillor Shan has said, a very, very important subject. But yeah, Councillor Liz.
Thank you, Chair. Just in summary, I'm kind of happy to go with the recommendation from Daniel that this stays in confidential session today because of the commercially sensitive information. But I really do think that the public need to know ASAP about the risks and the recommendations, because this is a really urgent matter and everybody needs to do their bit to make sure that it's sorted out. And it's costly, it needs a lot of time from people, but we've really got to get on with it. But I also think people need a very concise and clear summary that's readable and understandable and accessible. There's no way that the public would have got around those 600 pages that were out there today and made any sense of it. And I think we're all probably going to struggle to do that. So that's my sort of take on it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Liz. Councillor Gary.
Thanks, Chair. And sorry, try not to repeat myself a bit. I think the main paper that is for scrutiny has very little in there that we shouldn't share. I can't see anything in there, if I'm honest, that we shouldn't share. And we need to be showing how our transition towards net zero is going to take place. And we've been working on this for a very long time. I definitely would like in this publicly session to see a commitment that we're going to publish that net zero route map without delay. There might be some comments and feedback, and it's got to go through the circles, obviously, and I understand that. We don't necessarily need to publish those other very in-depth reports. They're quite old now. In fact, what we've done is moved beyond those and looked at how we're going to do the best we can in the resources and the time we've got. And there's nothing to hide in that. Every other local authority, every other public body is in the same sort of space. And I'm just fearful that we're closing ourselves down unneedlessly, and we could have, if we'd have shifted the way that the papers came to us, we could have just discussed that net zero route map in an open session and be open to all. So I guess just looking for confirmation that's what's the intention in this public session, and I'm happy then to move into a closed session. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm happy to support that, Gary, so we'll put that as a proposal to the committee, but I just want to hear from Councillor Pete Lewington first. We have a different take on it.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, that probably echoes some of the previous comments as well. The only other thing for me is when I look at section 4 of the officer's report, headed up resource implications, there are significant and large amounts of costs in there. And I mean, I'm sure our residents would be interested to see and understand that, especially in terms of how that investment or that cost is balanced against other budgetary pressures as well. So, yeah, I would have liked to have seen this not in confidential session.
Okay, yeah. I think we've made our views clear there, hopefully. But members of the committee, are you willing to support Councillor Gary's recommendation here? We go ahead now because time is of the essence, but that we push that the documents are into the public arena as soon as possible, particularly the route map when it's finalised, because this is just at this stage a draft route map. Is that, if I'm correct? I can see Councillor Jackie and Emma, RCO. So Emma, would you like to come in at this point here, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Jackie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I just seek confirmation from the Director that the substantive report without the appendices is suitable for the public domain? And my view is, if it is, there's no reason for you to go into private session today if you're focusing just on the substantive element and not the appendices. But Chair, that will be a job for you in terms of chairing the meeting to make sure that we don't get into some of the commercially sensitive elements. And then the other component around, there is extensive work that's been undertaken and a huge amount of detail, as you've all referred to, and you could make a recommendation that there is a member development session if committee are minded to do so. But we just need confirmation from the Director that the main report itself without the appendices is okay for public discussion. And if that is the case, then there's no reason why the committee team can't publish the report today on Modern Gov, minus the appendices, in my view.
Okay, thank you, Emma. Should we just hear from Councillor Jackie, and then we'll ask our directors to respond to that? Thank you.
Can I wait for Diane Reynolds' response? I do want to come back and close this down, but I'd prefer to wait for Diane's response first.
That's fine. Diane.
Yeah, sorry, with your permission, can I seek clarification a minute by what Emma means by the substantive report? Are you talking about the officer's report, Emma, or the route map itself?
The actual, so it's the
I would say the route map was the substantive report, but
yeah,
not the officer's report.
It starts on so our big page 13 is the
so the report starts on page 15, the big page, if you're in the full pack, and the route map ends on page 60, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So 15 to 20 is Dan's report, and 21 to 60 is the draft route map.
Yeah, thank you.
So Diane, back with you. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I still don't understand. I'm really sorry.
Shall we hear from Diane first, Councillor Sean, while you try and get your head around that? Yeah.
Oh, no, my question is this a substantive report, the report that begins on page 21 and ends on page 60? That's my question.
That is the draft route map, yes, on which Daniel's, I would say, the two items. So Daniel is bringing a report to us about the route map. So the two together, I would say, are the substantive item for this meeting. Yeah. Sorry, I thought that's what I'd said. Yeah. Sorry, Sean. Diane.
To confirm, Chair, those items are able to be scrutinised in the public domain. It's all of the supporting information that has got the confidential items in them. So should you wish to proceed in that way, it would be appropriate.
Okay, so members of the committee there, we've got a very definitive answer. The report from Daniel, page 15 to 20, if you're in the full pack, and the draft route map, pages 21 to 60, can be scrutinised in the public arena. And given the feeling in the room, I'm going to propose that we go ahead with that, but plead with you, please, not to go into the other reports where any financial or detailed information comes in. So I'll let you have a think about that while we hear what Councillor Jackie has to say, and then we need to move on.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Chair, for steering us through that, because it was a major concern that I had, that this is a really important report that we do want to be put into the public domain. It was always our intention to make sure that that happened. There is a process. We did ask why this needed to be in confidential session. I asked the question and received the same response that you have received. So I think we've taken a pragmatic view here today, and I think that's the right way to go. So just to thank the committee for ensuring that we can do that. I'm delighted that this is in the public domain now. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor Jackie. Okay, so to confirm then, we're all in agreement. Anybody got any further concerns? No, we're going to continue in the public arena then, and we're going to concentrate really on those two documents.
Chair, could I just ask for a show of hands from the committee,
Yeah.
please? Are those in agreement for going into public domain?
Okay, everybody. No concerns. Okay, and you're all
Thank
going to be on
you.
your best behaviour. Keep me on my toes, hopefully, but let's try and keep to the information that is public. Councillor Chloe. No, hand down. Councillor Adrian, you've got a hand up. Is that just the voting? Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. That was really worthwhile, robust discussion. Thank you for Emma for guiding us slightly there, and for Diane there. Thank you for working with us on that. So now we're going to move over to that item number 6, or actually, really, we're moving on to item 7 now to actually scrutinise the route map. And over to Daniel to present your report.
Thank you, Chair, on that one. Yes, do we, as well, the proposal was we actually go through the route map today for that discussion. So I presume you've all had a chance to read the route map by now. So I'm quite happy really to go through some of those recommendations, or would you rather go straight into questions? I'm happy to do that if more appropriate.
Well, you've got a presentation for us, hadn't you?
I have, yes. Okay, I'm happy to go through the presentation, that's fine. So, okay. Thank you, everyone. So hopefully everyone's got the document in front of them there in terms of the route map, what we're proposing. So we've recognised through this process actually that.
Are you going to share your slides?
I hadn't planned on, no, but I can do if you'd like me to.
I assume that's why you'd prepared a slideshow for us, that you wanted to present it. Is there anything in there?
I will share the route map from page 49 in the big pack. And everybody just confirm.
Was that your presentation, Daniel?
Yeah, it's the route map.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great. Okay, can everyone see that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so as I was saying, Willie, in terms of the route map, we recognise that this is a requirement of us all to fully commit to this transition to net zero. And actually, what we're proposing is the top 5 actions of each service area. So let's introduce climate to all agendas as a standard item. Many of our teams are already well embedded in that process. Others aren't so well embedded. So it's essentially working through that together to understand how we can deliver that. And we propose each director nominate a lead to work with us to identify key suppliers, to engage to obtain measured carbon performance data and their plans for reducing emissions. And actually on the back of that, we were actually interviewing yesterday for a post, which we're just currently going through results of that interviews yesterday. So we are actually looking to bring a post in place to work with that, synchronizing that activity. So engage staff and promote climate essentials and carbon literacy training. I am aware there's an action there around increasing that climate literacy training and building that capacity and confidence to ensure that that is something that the whole organisation is comfortable with. One of those measures is appointing a climate champion within each directorate, who will then undertake the necessary training to be able to filter those benefits through the organisation. And again, work with us to help develop and implement a climate and carbon communication strategy to celebrate those learnings, innovation and success. Comms team very often share with us the number of hits we receive for our climate nature-based stories. They are very successful and very well received by the public in general. Okay, moving on to the next slide. I believe you've seen this slide previously, and it's not as any surprise for us in terms of actually the size of those emissions, with the supply chain by far dominating that element of our outputs, as it were, in regards to carbon emissions. Local authorities, this is a standard pattern across the UK, with examples up to 98% in some of our more urban local authorities. So this is something that isn't an outlier, as it were. But obviously, what I'm keen to stress at this point is that what we can't do is put our eggs in one basket. Whilst we need to tackle the supply chain, actually other work streams as well need to contribute towards this transition. So just moving on. Okay, thank you. So, what I do want to stress is that we are making a difference, and we recognise that the net zero for Powys County Council is going to be very difficult by 2030 with our current resources, but can be achieved by 2040 with an interim target of 40% reduction by 2030. And of course, we do fully support greater engagement with Welsh Government on that financial support to deliver that. So existing and short-term planned investment in fleet and buildings will deliver around 10% reduction in emissions in the next 5 years. So as I was saying, we've got some excellent work already underway. And my team and I are on hand to help integrate that and normalise those climate risks and carbon performances through all key decisions. So I will come on to the supply chain shortly. Okay, moving on. So essentially, let's get down to detail in terms of what we can do to achieve the biggest savings quickly as possible. So that is essentially by more effective procurement and active contract management. And that gives an amazing 50% plus potential financial savings. So quite often when contracts are awarded, we do need to make sure we consider when those contracts are awarded, how we actually understand how that will help us reach our climate targets. So broadening ownership, staff confidence and responsibility for climate risk and carbon performance across the council will deliver a 5% saving. So this is what I was going to about the climate training essentially, and actually look at that culture within the organisation to help will deliver that. Consideration of lifetime carbon performance and offset costs. And actually in terms of those decisions again that are making, 5% reductions and long-term savings. So this is around numerous buildings, for example, what we're doing there to actually, for that initial cost, those long-term financial savings it will give us, and maximise on-site energy generation and move to validated sources of renewable energy. Quite often at the moment, sometimes when energy is utilised by the Powys estate, we're not essentially following through that where energy is sourced from. So it's something we need to just tighten up slightly. And of course, our extensive land holdings to develop good practice, case studies for community energy infrastructure and potential carbon capture and storage. So again, understanding the art of the possible with our estate and how that could be utilised to develop that. Just moving on, please. Okay, so quite often when we consider tackling climate change, it comes from sometimes some of the short-term financial conversations that we have. What we're asking people to consider, and when we undertake these projects, is actually the financial cost of climate change. We're in a position where actually it's cheaper to take action now than it is in the future. We see it with flooding constantly. Spending, making that investment now actually does make a considerable long-term saving for us. And actually, this is some of the more bleak headlines out there. These have all been confirmed and ratified in terms of heat-related mortality, air pollution, illness, poor diets linked to climate change impacts the cost of food, and flood damage to healthcare infrastructure and added pressure on emergency services. So it's simply a case that actually what we consider climate change, this is our community's health we're discussing. And just to reiterate that, these are some evidence figures here around that from LSE, for example. Under current policies, the total cost of climate change damage to the UK predicted to increase from 1.1% of GDP to 3.3% by 2050 and 7.4% by 2100. So we talk about the Future Generations Act, and we've got a duty to consider those future generations, and the same there as well around global mitigation and agriculture as well. So, yeah, 2023, the direct turnover of UK's low carbon renewable energy economy was an estimated 67.5 billion. So it just shows actually this is a growing sector. When you consider the term growth, we talk about green growth, but in reality, it's simply growth. Next slide, please. Again, I won't dwell on this one, but this is some more case studies there really of the potential that we all aware of actually cost of climate change on transport. And we know all too well the impact of flooding on our communities here in Powys. Moving on. And of course, biodiversity and education. Again, very much front of mind currently given the Stage of Nature report given by NRW recently. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is something I think it really the crux of the matter today, really, essentially. So we're proposing, my team and I, Adrian Cooper's on the call, we've been working through a strategic route map on how to get to net zero within Powys County, as Powys County Council. So we've broken it down by as part of a work streams essentially, and those around factors such as the action plans we're working to within our service areas, the fleet transition, the school LED solar, working through those. But actually, one of the key elements we're looking to focus on in the short term is supply chain carbon assessment, and that transition to tier 2 reporting for major contracts above 5 million. We're not always capturing at the moment some of those savings in our supply chain. It's purely been done in a cost element as opposed to actually some of the tier 2 reporting. And as you can see there, then that's the 5% down to 35%, then on from 2026. So the scope 1 and 2. Again, those continuing the action plans and the fleet transition, the schools, etc. But actually that tier 2 reporting for contracts above 1 million. So as you can see, we've gone from 5 million contracts to 1 million contracts, and sustainability in CO2 in suppliers and material selections. So just getting that granular detail really, us as an organisation, what are we doing to tackle that, and how are we actually coding that and improve contract management and performance reporting. Then moving forward to 28 onwards, again, fleet decarbonise, building fabric and heating improvements, and that mandatory supplier commitments to carbon reduction. As I was saying, we're currently interviewing yesterday for a post to actually work between us, our suppliers, and capture that information essentially. And then finally, 2035, there will always be a need for some carbon offsetting. And this is how we approach that as a local authority, using our estate as something to consider and and that's actually part of our work we're doing currently as well to complement this around our future of our state modelling. Actually, what are the options there? What can benefit those environmental benefits to our communities, as well as tackling that climate change and also deliver long-term energy needs for our communities. Just there, I won't go into that in detail, it's probably too small on the screen, but that gives you an idea of the work streams, whether the emissions are all direct or indirect, and actually how we can work through that. So that is in your pack there that we're currently working through. Okay. So just moving on to the immediate next steps is work with my team to capture those tier 2 suppliers who are already delivering reductions. We simply not capture that information at the moment. So there are some quick wins to be had there. Just trying to understand really what those suppliers are doing and actually how we can utilise that information to drive the pace of that climate change. And I'm working with those service areas that we will work with them by the climate champions, which mentions there, and actually helping to understand how we capture those savings from those contracts. And of course, funding opportunities as well. There is numerous funding streams available cropping up. Quite often they've got short windows, but we have been very successful to date in applying for those, and that will continue. And of course, as I go back to the first point, actually, in terms of comms, what have you, the number of hits we get as a local authority for our story celebrating successes and recognising wins around our climate are one of by far some of the most popular stories that are embraced by the public. So I think at that point there, I will stop talking and I will take on to questions. Thank you, Chair.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you. If officers want to just take the slideshow down and then we can see everybody. Lovely. And Councillor Peter Lewington, you're first to put your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, and thank you, Dan, for the presentation there and the information contained therein. I do accept that we should be doing something, and I can see the amount of work there and the amount of work that you've got planned to do. But sometimes I just ask myself, where is the measured, balanced approach on this between, I guess, what we want to do, I think as you set out there, Dan, which is admirable, and what we can realistically do. And within the realistic side, the other side of the balance for me is the cost impact on our residents, and then really what can we as Powys actually do to impact the global situation. So I think sometimes this risk and presentation comes across as if Powys can actually solve the entire world's problem. But obviously, I'm sure we all accept that we can't solve it all on our own. So something I would like to understand is how we work with our neighbouring councils, Welsh Government, UK Government, etc., just so as we're not working on our own in an isolation budget. The other point for me is I understand a bit about reducing our own carbon procurement footprint, but I start to question, why do we impose that on others? So on other businesses, which of course would increase cost to us and to our residents. Why don't we allow them to get on and get their own house in order? Because again, it appears to me like Paris is trying to solve a global problem. And I guess finally at the end, I saw in your report, Dan, as I alluded to earlier, some of the costs around this, which seemed quite high in section 4 of your report. So I guess my final point is when we're looking at those costs and we're putting that amount of investment into actually doing this, how do we balance that against other budgetary, I guess, pressures where decisions, I assume, are being made between potentially simplistically filling a pothole or pursuing something on the green action plan that you have there? Thank you, Chair.
There we are. Thank you, Peter. I think if you got that, Dan and Diane, I think there were 4 questions in there. So the first was about how we're working with others, be that local government, national government or others. The second is our influence on our suppliers. I think that's what you were mentioning there, Pete, and what influence we have or whether we should have any. The third was about the cost section of the report. So I think you're talking there about the KPIs, how we're justifying value and how that's defined. So, Daniel, is that with you? Are you able?
Chair, it's Emma Palmer again.
Hello,
Sorry,
Emma.
jumping in. Daniel's just had a power cut.
Oh dear.
So I think whether Councillor Charlton would like to come in as the portfolio holder to answer where possible, and then maybe Adrian or Diane for the the technical questions rather than anything political. Thank you.
Poor Daniel, that's probably the most stressful thing that can happen, isn't it, today? I'm hoping my generator doesn't conk out. Right, Councillor Jackie.
Yes. I'm very happy to come back in on some of those points. I think they're very pertinent points and they're important points that we should be able to cover today. I don't agree totally with what Councillor Peter is saying. We do have a responsibility. If we don't stand up and deliver on our responsible delivery of services and make sure that we take both the climate and nature emergency into consideration, then we're doing a disservice to our residents. So I think we do have a responsibility and we do have to stand up to that. There was a lot of technical questions here. Adrian Cooper, who is the author of the route map and somebody we brought in with special expertise and understanding of all these issues, and he has actually gone through all of the paperwork that you've received here and used it to actually present this route map here to you. So I think if that's okay, I will pass over to Adrian to answer the more technical responses that you need, Councillor Peter. Thank you.
Good morning, Adrian. Welcome and thank you very much. And over to you.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Yes, as Councillor Jackie has said, I was brought in to provide support of a specialist nature. And just very quickly, for those who don't know me, I was formerly the Climate Change Manager for Shropshire Council, and I currently act as a business consultant advising large businesses on carbon reduction. That's my day job, if you will. So in terms of those specific questions that Councillor Peters raised, yes, the supply chain piece to start, absolutely. It could be seen as an imposition, but you have to bear in mind that there's a staged approach proposed here. So you're starting to work with the largest suppliers first on large contracts. And do bear in mind, please, that those companies are most likely already involved in monitoring, managing and reducing their carbon emissions, because they will have other clients who already require that of them. So it's not necessarily that we're asking for something special or new that they're not already doing. I think as time goes on, and I see this all the time with my kind of day job, in order for even quite small firms to now access and tender for work through frameworks and so on, there is now a widespread requirement for companies to actually prepare carbon reduction plans and measure their carbon performance. So this is something that is becoming normalised, basically. Just to go back very quickly and pick up the point about the size of the figures involved, the reason that the route map focuses on procurement and supply chain matters is that that is where the greatest gains can be made in the shortest period of time. If we were to focus only on the direct emissions from Paris County Council, particularly from things like buildings and the fleet, which are two of the larger elements of your current carbon account, that's great, and there's a lot of really good stuff going on already, it must be said, and I'm sure that that will continue. But to focus on that entirely would impose a very, very significant cost, which I think is what Councillor Peter is referring to. It is set out in the route map, which summarises some of the material from the background documents anyway, in a public way. And the big kind of eye-catching figure in there is the assessment from some of that material, if you add it all together, comes to a kind of gross capital cost of around £450 million, which is not something I would suggest which is affordable or justifiable on its own in current budget circumstances, if it only delivers a modest improvement in performance. Much better to work with softer measures, potentially, particularly around procurement and supply chain, particularly around integrating consideration of this issue. It wants to be something that's considered as an integral part of any major decision. What are the carbon implications? What are the climate implications of that decision? And those things can actually deliver a quite substantial improvement without that very high price tag that you're seeing as the backstop, basically. The cooperative piece, I may not be best placed to answer, but clearly there are opportunities to work with other local authorities, neighbouring local authorities in particular, both within Wales and across the border in England. The Marches approach is a part of that, particularly focused on perhaps managing flood risk at the moment, but there are other opportunities to expand that out to consider this area as well. Welsh Government, I imagine, is going to be crucial in this, because the expectation is coming from Welsh Government about achieving a particular level of decarbonisation by a target date. If that isn't achievable because it's too ambitious in light of the current available resources, then clearly there's an argument to be had there with Welsh Government. I'm not perhaps best placed to discuss that one. I defer to Councillor Jackie and Diane on that one. Forgive me, Chair, I've lost a little bit of track of where I was. What was the fourth?
So I think the fourth one was the KPIs, how we judge the
Yes.
value for money, I suppose, for want of a better
Yes,
phrase.
thank you for the reminder. Yes, so in terms of KPIs and monitoring of the performance, there's a lot of work going on in the background, and there was some material shared to give you a little sort of snapshot insight into this, in terms of how activity, particularly at a directorate level, needs to be reported and monitored in future. And do bear in mind that the Paris Council's total carbon account performance basically is built up from an assessment of what different directorates are doing and the impact of their activities on the overall level of carbon emissions. So it's an extension of that, getting people at that level to actually come up with a plan and start monitoring the effectiveness of the actions that they're taking to address this agenda. So sorry for the rather long-winded answer, but I hope that covers it for Councillor Peter.
There we are. Councillor Pete, your hand is still up. Are you happy?
Yeah, if I could just come back slightly, Chair, if that's okay.
Yes, quickly, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Councillor Jackie, as well. I think Councillor Jackie, don't get me wrong. I do accept that we need to do something. I think the bit for me is this balanced, proportionate approach. So you know, I guess I look at that stat when it says the UK is 1% of the global problem. So Paris is obviously a much smaller percentage. But that's not to say that we don't do anything. That's why I say it needs to be balanced and it needs to be measured. I was pleased in a way to hear Adrian when he said some phrases like doing some softer measures and doing those without the higher price tag. So that starts to fit into my balanced and measured thinking. And I guess just the other bit, just around the KPIs, Chair, what I was also trying to drive at, as well as performance, is would there be a table, say, of where we've made choices, where you know, if you like, we've spent the money on doing this part of the route map, but it meant we couldn't do potholes, for example. Sorry to keep on coming back to potholes, but or some other service. Yeah, you know, I guess if we put the money in there, we either do reduced services or we put up council tax. So in those KPIs, is there something around having a table of those choices? Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Pete. I can see Councillor Jackie's got a hand up. I'm guessing some of the work we will do will pay back in the long term, but that's for you to answer. Councillor Jackie, you got your hand up.
Yeah, just to come back on the potholes always comes up, and thank you very much. And I can assure you, Councillor Peter, that one of the reasons why we're doing these measures, we're putting these measures in place, is to prevent things like potholes. One of the problems that we have at the moment on our highways is the high level of flooding that we've got. A lot of that flooding comes off of the hillside straight down onto our roads, undermines the tarmac, and provides us with the potholes that we know we've got on our roads. So one of the things that we're doing is trying to understand what the climate and nature emergency does on impacts on us and how we can become more resilient. That's not necessarily about investing money, but it is about understanding what those implications are. And a huge amount of work has been going on with the WLGA, with Welsh Government, with the UK Government and others around these big issues that we can't address on our own, we have to address together. So yeah, I understand potholes, but we are not de-investing in potholes and reinvesting in climate change. What we're doing is trying to understand what the implications are and delivering our services to overcome that. Our roads are really important to all our other services as well, and we recognise that too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jackie. So Councillor Corinna is next. I've got a few hands up now, so great.
Thanks very much, Chair. I've got four points. I don't want to stray into financially sensitive areas, but there is a suggestion that if in terms of schools, maybe care homes, that if we acted now and maybe got a loan rather than waiting for a grant, we could save more money, and maybe we should hurry up with that. I would like to ask Adrian he puts a great deal of emphasis on on carbon literacy. Could he please give us instances of other authorities that have trained all their staff and outcomes? This last Saturday, there was a really good meeting led by Van Albert team, funded by the Public Service Board. That funding is going to end this February. They have managed to get us the data about our county-wide or territorial emissions. How is this work going to be continued? And finally, in the slides that Daniel shared, I see a date, a net zero date of 2040, whereas in the route map, 2035 is mentioned. Could Adrian again please tell me the history behind those different figures? Thank you.
Okay.
Right,
Adrian, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I will just pick up the piece about carbon literacy training first, because that's probably the easiest for me to answer. It wouldn't surprise you that a very large number of local authorities undertake carbon literacy training, and the validity of doing that, the effectiveness of doing that, is borne out by a lot of background research, which has been commissioned to assess its effectiveness. So, for example, there's a study, it's a little bit dated now, by Jacobs, who are a large environmental consultancy, who were of the opinion, following research that they did on this, that having a carbon literate staff, bear in mind this isn't just about local authorities, it's other organisations and businesses as well, having a carbon literate staff can lead to substantive performance improvements in terms of carbon emissions. And the reason for that is that staff feel more confident about taking decisions about whether to do something a particular way, or whether to buy something as opposed to something else, in a way which reflects the carbon impact of that decision. And the overall quantitative assessment suggests that that can lead to a 15% improvement, which is actually huge if you think about it. Just to put that in context, that's about the same level of improvement as spending £18 million to upgrade your fleet and properties. It's quite impressive, given that you're not spending anything like that much to get carbon literacy training rolled out. In terms of the 2035, 2040 piece, I'm going to defer that one. I'm not sure that's really, it's a bit political for me. I think I would like to probably defer that one either to Diane or perhaps to Councillor Jackie to answer, if that's okay.
Yep. Councillor Jackie and Diane, you've both got your hands up, so who wants to come in first?
I'll come in on the 2035 if I may, because that is a political decision. We have had quite a lot of discussions around this. We've flip-flopped between 2035 and 2040. My inclination is to retain the target that we have, which was set by Welsh Government, but understand that we do need to take a pragmatic view about what we can achieve. So I think the route map is actually quite clear. And when we look at the strategic route map on slide, whatever number it was, where we've got the boxes, it's quite clear there that we can actually reach net zero by 2035 if we follow the route map and things work out. Always a risk that might not happen, but I think we can be fairly confident that that 2035 figure is a figure that we can achieve. And there could be other things that come into play. That's 10 years away. There could be new technologies coming in. There could be new grants coming in. There could be new types of funding, which is all in the ether at the moment. So I'm very comfortable with us retaining the 2030 target with Welsh Government, but understanding that at the moment we're only going to reach 40%, but by 2035 we could be on target to reach our net zero figure. So I hope that helps.
If Karina doesn't mind, I'd like to come in there. So on So the map you're talking about, which was in the slides, it's on page 23 of the route map document, item F. I don't know, the slides weren't numbered, but it talks about those investments. As you say, it had those blocks, and it showed at the end that to reach those final targets, we needed to do the offsetting. My question is, why can't the offsetting be going on at the same time as the other works? Because then you wouldn't need the extra 5 years. From what I can see, the extra 5 years is just to scoop up those things that are not within our control, and therefore we're going to offset. So why can't they go on? And supplementary to that, my question is that the council declared its climate emergency in 2020, so we're already 5 years down the line. So have we been too slow to this point? Is that why we're pushing it on 5 years after the original commitment?
I suspect there's a lot of truth in that that argument, Councillor Angela. I don't think we've been sat on our laurels, but I think we have had to have a full organisation culture change, and culture change does take time. That's still quite slow, but I think we are making some inroads, which is one of the priorities, I believe, in the route map as well, is to continue that work through that behaviour change and culture change in the organisation, which is always going to be the most difficult one to achieve. Funding hasn't been there, and we shouldn't blame funding. That's not a good way of going about these things, but I don't think we've been as good at achieving our funding potential for all kinds of different reasons that we could go into, but there's no point in going over history. We haven't achieved it, we didn't manage it, but I think we're on target now to think more clearly about that and be in a much better position to apply for funding. There are things that are out there that are helping us with this, things like the Marches investment platform or the environmental platform, things like the Severn Valley Water Management Scheme, things like the extended producers responsibility. Those have all got climate elements in them, and I think, you know, if we follow the route map, if we take it seriously and we follow the KPIs that we've set, we could actually be in a much better position to tell us as an authority where we are. So I'm going to stop there, because hopefully I've answered your questions as well.
Well, you sort of have, Councillor Jackie, but my concern is, and I'm somebody who likes to look forward, not backwards, but I think we need to look backwards to be sure we've got the confidence we've got it right going forwards. And I am concerned about those potentially wasted 5 years, maybe not wasted, that's for you to say. But finances talked about a lot, and we didn't get the budget. However, a lot of money has been invested in this. We've had 3 members of staff, and a lot of time has taken place. So I don't think I do upset that we haven't had enough money, because the council has committed quite a bit of its budget to those members of staff to do the work. But anyway, it's not for me to hog the meeting. I'm going to go on. I can see lots of members have got their hands up. Diane and Daniel, did you want to come in there, or shall we hear from a few more members first?
Happy to hear from a few more members if you want, Chair, and I'll try and wrap everything up.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah.
That's great, thank you. So, Councillor Liz. You're on mute, Liz. That famous now post-COVID phrase.
I put it on so you don't hear the dog barking.
Thank you, Councillor Liz.
Okay, so I think the cultural change bit is really important. I'm pleased to see, you know, there's this stuff going on about the education and making us all, you know, more aware, and hopefully sort of sharing that with the public. I really agree with the supply chain route, because, you know, Brecon Town Council now started doing this, you know, in the same way when we appoint people, you know, and assess tenders. We look at equality and we look at safeguarding. We're now starting to look at, you know, what the contractor's doing in terms of climate change. So I think that's, you know, another really important thing. So they're both observations. But I just wonder if maybe Daniel could just, for the benefit of the public, give a little example of one of the case studies, you know, in relation to the carbon capture on, you know, council land, obviously without any commercially sensitive information. I'm guessing that they are examples from other places, Daniel.
Okay.
Yeah,
Dan,
happy to come in there. Thank you, Councillor, for that question. Yeah, funny, I did have my hand up actually to to come back on one of the points made there previously about the 5 years. Just the point I wanted to make is obviously, when we talk about offsetting, I think carbon capture, for example, I only use the example here of tree planting is something that's in the public domain. Our calculations have shown that it takes 5 years from a tree to go into the ground to be able to claim that carbon back.
Yeah.
So when we talk offsetting within the route map, we need to make sure we've got that. We need to factor in that 5-year lead-in time for that offsetting that to be calculated.
Yes.
So we are, as part of the wider work within Powys County Council, my team and I, we are considering what options are available to us, understanding with the use of our estate, actually where are we already capturing carbon? There's studies being undertaken as we speak on the Woodland estate, for example. Actually, what's happening there? So I think, go back to the point that actually for the route map, with that carbon sequestration taking place there, that 5 years is a legitimate lead-in time, really, for that. Now, going into some of the wider examples you mentioned there, Councillor, obviously, and this is Councillor Charlton has touched upon, with, for example, the Severn Valley Water Management Scheme, we're deeply aware that there's a need for 25,000 nature-based solutions to tackle some of the flooding in the Severn Valley. So we're working now with our partners on that. We've got demonstrators up and running already, Gillsfield Brook, for example, and actually the scalability of that work is underway. So it shows very well in that regional working on that carbon capture and that carbon sequestration, what we're looking to do around that. I think we've seen examples, for example, in Shropshire with biochar coming to the fore, actually looking at new technologies and the capacity they have. So there's a number of projects we are partnering in, but that lead-in time for that carbon sequestration is fundamental. We can't just flip a switch and say, okay, we're offsetting 30% now. You can go and buy that offsetting, but given the financial situation and the pressures we're under, that would be something need to be considered by politicians.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it kind of, in a way, reflects Councillor Jackie's point about cost-benefit analysis of all this. And back to the potholes, Jackie, I'll be writing to you.
Okay, Councillor Sean.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, officers, and thank you for the route map. One quick note before I continue: the introduction says that Powys County Council declared climate and nature emergencies in 2020, but it didn't. It declared a climate emergency in 2020, and the nature emergency came later in late 2022, moved by Councillor Adam Kennelly.
I seconded that motion, actually, but yes, you're correct.
Late 2022. So the climate declaration was both an ambition to be a net zero council by 2030 and also supporting Powys to become a net zero county by 2050. And the strategic risk of the council, isn't it, set out in the risk register, is much more to do with the county's territorial emissions and the impacts of global emissions rises than our institutional emissions. So the global situation, of course, Councillor Peter has already referred to it, but the global situation isn't something out there, is it? It's something that we are all a part of and are contributing to and are complicit in with our behaviours and our systems and the processes that we follow in our daily lives. So I'd like a little bit more detail and vision about the vision for how we engage with the public about this. The route map does mention it, but only once, right at the end in section 6, indeed in one of the KPIs. I was really pleased to see a KPI there, which is about numbers of communities engaged in adaptation. Because the front-facing services, and we've talked a little bit about it already, the front-facing services are the ones that residents engage in highest numbers, aren't they? So Councillor Jackie has already mentioned how we could reframe that pothole conversation, for example, to talk about the connection of why the potholes in people's areas aren't being filled in as quickly as people want them to be. It's not just about cost and resource, it's also about the sheer level of rain that we have now, which is only going to get worse, and runoff, obviously. So there are other front-facing services we could have these conversations. Streetlight dimming, why? Gritting, why? All of that stuff, you know. And I think the report sort of has already sort of signalled the potential for this here. So when it's talking about the climate literacy programme, which I totally applaud, by the way, and I might have a few questions about that later. The report, not the report, the route map refers to the small climate team, and it then says there's also active engagement in the decarbonisation agenda from many enthusiastic, knowledgeable and motivated staff in other services. And I would say that is also true of town and community councils across the county, and it's also true of residents across the county. Daniel has referred to how many hits the good news stories about climate bring about. So I wonder whether that integration and normalisation agenda for upskilling staff might include upskilling staff in how to hold conversations with communities about these subjects. Because we need to, I think, because the good news stories is what engages them, but actually the good news stories aren't telling the reality of the wider situation, which generally isn't good news. It isn't good news. It's really dire. So I just wanted to make that. I wanted to make that point that we have the power to convene as a local authority, and I wonder where that convening of the public in really focused discussion about what we might do as a whole community, as a county, might fit in with this route map.
Right. So that I sort of lost the question a little bit, Sian. So you're asking within all that. I'm sure there was a question. Did you get that?
Is there thinking behind? There isn't detail in the route map apart from the reference, that brief reference in the KPI. And
right. Okay.
Is there,
so Daniel,
my question, if I, to put it into a question, my question would be: is there thinking and discussions around the edges of this route map around where we might adhere to the sustainable Paris principle of early engagement and start to have conversations with the public about why this isn't money at the side, money that's separate from everything else that we do, but how it directly relates to the services that they get, as mentioned by Councillor Jackie, in terms of deluges from runoff causing potholes. You know,
I can see Diane is nodding. So shall we go to Diane to let her come back on that? Thank you. Thank you, Sian. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you, Chair. I think this kind of relates back as well to Councillor Lewington's question about how we work with other public sector partners, and I think there was also reference to the work of the Public Service Board and the funding that was going on there. So it kind of wraps all of those together. I just wanted to kind of outline. So in terms of the partners we work with, obviously we've got other partners within the Public Service Board, which include fire, police and the Health Board and the National Park. So we work closely with those, and within that, within our plan as a Public Service Board, that's looking at that wider territorial emissions, which is why our route map is more focused on the council, because our wider work is done under the umbrella of the Public Service Board. Now, that Public Service Board has been working with many organisations, and including ourselves, which are working together in a collaboration to have those community councils, and they're widespread. They're with town and community councils. They're going out within the communities as per the event mentioned last Saturday. They're working with climate networks as well. So to kind of try and get that message across at all different levels across our whole system. So you're quite right, we are very good actors in terms of having those conversations, but we've got to have conversations everywhere at all levels, and we need a mass of support to do that. We cannot do that within council resource, and we recognise that very early on, and that's why as a Public Service Board we recognise the challenge that we've got together. So but that doesn't mean to say that those are the only routes. So we've also, I think Dan mentioned the Severn Valley Water Management Scheme, where we've been working with the Environment Agency, Natural Resources Wales, ourselves, Shropshire, Worcester, trying to actually go out and have those conversations specifically around flood. But within all of those sessions where we've gone out in the communities to have those conversations, it hasn't just stayed on flooding, it's also broadened the discussion to climate, etc. So we've been going out and convening those sessions and having discussions with the public, talking to them not only about how we mitigate, but how some low level kind of changes in behavior can actually have a benefit on stopping the flow of water, or in terms of drought in the summer. So those discussions are also going on, but obviously to really kind of galvanize action on all of this we recognize is going to cost a significant amount of money, and we're never going to be able to do that without from just government funding. This also needs the private sector to come with us, and we're working with our partners across Shropshire, Herefordshire and Monmouthshire under the Marches partnership to actually look at how we can make that bridge between landowners and those that are willing to invest for their own reasons, so say water companies or etc. They're willing to put in that private sector investment to make the changes that will benefit climate reduction, will benefit nature-based solutions and nature recovery as a whole conglomerate together. So we're also working on that partnership, looking at the funding sources that might come through to deliver that. And I think that's some of the answers the chair's question in terms of the timing of some of those nature-based solutions and being able to find the funding through a different route that might be able to support that. But we know that will take time to kind of convene. And then just to pick up on, also our partners are people that we commission services from. Very much they work in partnership with us, delivering social care and all of those elements. And I take you back to 2.10 in the report, your big pack, page 30. We must be reminded that most of the council spending is through the supply chain. That's why we have to focus on the supply chain. And that's not trying to drive up costs, that's trying to deliver the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act on sustainable procurement as well. So by working with those companies who actually are further down this line than we thought. So we've got a very innovative system to be able to capture this information, and another local authority has done got a huge amount of resource and worked with all of those companies to understand where they were already at, and they've managed to shift up to, I think Dan will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 40% of their emissions on the supply chain just by finding out and working with those organisations that they procure from. And that, I think, is what we're trying to deliver in step one, not trying to increase cost, but actually trying to understand where those organisations already are on coming on this journey with us. So I'm hoping I've wrapped up quite a few questions there in one, Chair. Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute myself then. Yeah, thank you for that, Diane. That's a really in-depth response, and that I think that does give a little bit of assurance. The only thing I'd say there on the suppliers are looking outward to other councils, and I think that's great that we're looking what's happening elsewhere. That we must recognise in Powys that a lot of our suppliers, if we want to support local, are small local businesses, and the challenge might be quite different for them on this route with regard to a large, national organisation. So just really making that as a comment and just flagging it up that we need to be aware of that we don't want to sort of price out our local suppliers because they are an important part of our local economy and employment and everything as well. So it's balancing those two needs, isn't it? So I just want to make that point, really. It's not really a question. So on to the members. So Councillor Peter next, then Councillor Chloe and Councillor Gary. So Councillor Peter James.
Thank you, Chair. And can I thank Daniel for the route map that he's put in front of us. My question is really, as being part of the climate and nature group, the measures are speeding up. We've got to hit by 2030. I understand that we're having one new member post put in place, but will there be more speeding up of places for staff? Because I know that certain staff were overloaded with certain parts of the climate and nature, and certain things weren't getting And I do clarify that they're working really hard, but they're being overloaded a little bit. As with residents, I just wondered if it's joined up enough, really, because with the residents, farming and tourism, is the information getting out to those three groups to join it up within communities, as well as what's got to be carried out by Powys, and is the bigger picture getting together on that? And you did hit on climate champions. How do I know that you're actually engaging with town councils, but there's a lot of work being carried out privately with farming communities, with tourism communities, and with residents, and how do that get clarified into the bigger picture of Powys? So there's a few things there that I'm just sort of concerned about, of getting that good work noted, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Of capturing that good news.
Yes, that's the word, capturing. Thank you.
So, Daniel, I don't know if any work has happened on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Certainly, in terms of the PSB is set up there to look at that work, and that was a project that has a funding cycle where we're part of around how we actually engage that community. And only last Saturday there was that event where a number of the team attended and worked on that. I think going forward, and this is partly why we've been so keen on the route map in place, it does actually give us a clear work stream, as it were, as officials, to drive the net zero forward. And I think once it's adopted, once we and that is reflected in the team. You know, as I was saying, we are a small team, but we're certainly punching above our weight. And I'm pleased to say, you know, we were interviewing yesterday to fill a post within the team. So I think we're moving from that policy development stage of tackling the climate emergency to now actually implementing a costed way forward, an implementation stage with the associated KPIs on that. So yeah, I think it as that accelerates and the team become more familiar with it and the organisation adopts it through those climate champions, we'll see those gains accelerate accordingly. And it goes back to the point Dan made previously about you know, that we are in that situation where we've got the climate champions in place and we can get that procurement underway and just understand actually what those big contracts we're awarding, make sure that contract management is in place as well. That's the vital thing there, to record those savings. But no, I think in terms of going back to the community engagement, that's something we are looking to get out over the next few months around the economic strategy, in terms of our community engagement, etc. And that will be part of that, definitely.
Okay. So extending on that then, the route map calls for broadening ownership of this, and indeed to deliver, we're going to need everybody on board, aren't we? And it talks about those climate champions. So are you confident that your fellow directors, that the managerial staff are on board, and are those climate champions going to come from within the staff force of the council? Is any work happening there? And you know, how can you be confident? Because you, as you say, you're a small team, you can't be everywhere. You need each service area to be committed to this and delivering, don't you?
That's right. Yeah. Yes, thank you, Joe. Happy to come on that. Yeah, no, you're spot on, Chair. Really, and we've had some really positive briefing sessions working with, you know, it's CLT at SLT that Adrian and myself have briefed the teams on what's needed. But there's a recognition actually this transition to adoption of the route map actually can deliver financial savings as well potentially. So it's an exercise, and as some of those stats I shared in the route map, the impact of climate change, every single member of Powys County Council is deeply aware of what those costs are, and actually how by adopting that method, you know, we can tackle the climate emergency and potentially deliver an efficient service as possible as well.
So it's selling that story to them. It's a win-win for the climate, but for their own service area budgets as well. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely, Chair.
Yeah, and how are you going to keep a handle, or who is going to keep a handle that each department is doing what?
Yeah, so the purpose of having a climate champion per service area essentially is that they are then the go-between between the small climate team and the wider procurement team, and this is where, as I mentioned, the posts are evolving within the organisation. It's actually so much of tackling climate change actually comes down to contract management in terms of engaging with those teams. And it's, as I was saying, it's that evolution away from policy development actually into giving real savings. And it's very much a project management role now as much as anything, really. And I think that's where, well, we're seeing a shift away from this route map has been needed. Exactly. So. Sorry,
Okay.
I see Councillor Charlton's made a comment there. Sorry, Councillor, I apologize.
Yes.
I didn't see a hand up. Sorry, Councillor, if that was my
I
fault.
was going to call Councillor Jackie in now because she's put in the chat. So, Councillor Jackie, I think you'd like to respond a bit further to Sian's comments earlier. Councillor Sian?
Yes, if that's okay. I did want to come in just after Sian's other questions were answered.
Sorry, I missed you there. Apologies for that.
That's okay. I thought you wanted to move on, so I was respectful of that need as well. I think Councillor Sian is absolutely right, is that we know that there is a high level of interest out there amongst our residents around the climate and nature emergencies, and we know that a lot of that are people who are really, really concerned and will engage anyway. What we're not doing is reaching those people who wouldn't necessarily engage in the conferences that we've had. We've had 3 very successful conferences in Powys and a call for another one next year from the people who attended on Saturday. And there was 120 people turned out on Saturday to this conference. We did do some not quite deliberative engagement there, but there was quite a lot of engagement undertaken at that day. But it's really difficult. A day with 120 people, you're not going to be able to do the in-depth engagement that you want to do. So we don't have a plan, but I do think it's important that when we have this route map out there in the public domain, that we do start to look at how we do engage with our public, and is there a way that we can do that? Is that our role as a county council, or is that somebody else's role? But I do think we need to look at it, and I think it's a point very well made that we want people to come in and support us, but not only support us, help us make decisions going forward as well. It's their world as well as our world, and we need everybody to engage in that. So I agree with Councillor Sian. I just don't have a way forward at the moment.
There we are. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I could see you put that in the chat and I thought it was important you got the opportunity to respond there, Councillor Jackie. Thank you. So next we've got Councillor Chloe, then Councillor Gary. So Councillor Chloe, with you.
Thank you, Councillor Angela, and thanks as well for all the work that's gone into putting a route map together. It's on the Climate and Nature Steering Group, and it's nice, as I said there, it's nice to see the plan, going forwards. Most of the points I wanted to raise have kind of come up, but I do want to expand on a few of them if that's okay. So one of the ones that came up, we've talked about resources and staffing, and we mentioned that we have had staffing and resource over the last sort of 5 years, and the impact of that in terms of change has been not very significant. Jackie mentioned it's been a bit slower than we would have liked, and so there's a lot, maybe, well, I suppose a question or a request perhaps to reflect on what hasn't worked over that time. I agree with Angela, we want to look forward, but if the current system and setup of staffing and strategic steering groups and thematic boards and things isn't working, then we need a different way of doing it going forward so that we do have impact and it does make a difference at the speed and the pace that we want to do. I know Daniel and your team have done a lot of work on making sure that the targets are realistic and you think they're achievable. So it would, I suppose, as a question, it would be good to hear about whether that involves any internal changes of how it's set up to try and achieve that. So that's my first question. I've got a couple more. If I go through them all first, then perhaps they can be picked up in order. That'd be great. The second one is around the savings that were mentioned. The costs that if we don't act, we will be facing as a council. And Corinna mentioned we're kind of waiting for grants to come forward, but that seems a bit of a risky approach. And whether there's, thinking that's been done to try and invest to save or get out loans or try and deal with some of these issues now, as we do have some very scary costs coming down the line. I appreciate the point Councillor Pete Lewington made earlier about balancing costs and activity, but I don't think we can really afford not to deal with these at pace, I suppose. So another question really, just to see how that might look in terms of what other options there would be. As I suppose a very specific one, we've not got funding for that PSB work and that territorial emissions work. I wonder if there's any ideas on how that could be funded. I think it's really valuable and important to us, and it's part of the climate commitment, the climate emergency that was declared, that we would look at outside of just the council's emissions. And then finally, just a plea alongside what Councillor Shana said about engaging outside of the council on things. Obviously, procurement is one of our biggest emission areas. We do have partners out there who would be willing to help and engage on this. And I'll put my hands up and say I work at the Food Partnership, but food is a huge area of emissions, and I'm sure we'd all be really keen to help the council work on procurement contracts that help reduce emissions. There we go. 4 questions, I think. You're on mute, Angela.
Apologies for that. Yes. So who would like to take those questions, those 4 questions there from Chloe? So she's talking about progress to date and whether the current working groups and thematic groups are the right way forward. I think that was the first. Diane, sorry, you've got your hand up. Sorry, I can't, it doesn't show up in the sky of your background picture very well.
Oh.
Apologies, my fault. I need stronger glasses, perhaps.
I have to change the background, Chair. So in terms of reflecting on what has worked and what hasn't worked, so within the 5 years, obviously, we haven't just set out a route plan at the beginning of what we were going to do and just carried on until we've got to this point of creating a new route map. We have reflected over that 5-year period and changed our approach twice within that process. So we set off with our original thoughts of the areas that we should look at. Then we did a piece of work with Netherwood Solutions, looking at a study in terms of the research and information that was coming from local governments and how best to kind of take forward the climate challenge. So we repivoted after a couple of years, and then following that, because we saw that it wasn't having the impact that we expected, we did another round of workshops with the Climate and Nature Steering Group, looking at different aspects of climate and nature and how we can actually delve down and create action plans that will have a better impact than those that we were already on the trajectory of. So I think we have reflected, but I do take on board that a proper kind of sit and reflection and to kind of pull all that together in our understanding so it helps inform the way forward would still be really helpful. So I do accept that. In terms of the funding, obviously, to be able to access any funding, you have to have also sat in the bag a kind of in-depth feasibility study of how to draw down that funding. And it's the feasibility studies that are never funded and actually do take a lot of resource, time and cost, actually, because you have to bring in external studies, etc., to do those. As you'll see, in one of the biggest areas of our emissions in terms of our buildings is across the schools sites, and we have done a condition survey and a net zero survey across the whole of our estate to see how we could actually address some of those issues. So it's that doesn't give us the kind of technical feasibility study that you need for every single building, but it does give us an idea of where we could go first to kind of have the biggest impact, etc. So all of that information is now sat there, and we can actually then move on to try and draw down the funding that's available. And we do put in, for every funding that's available, we do put in any feasibilities that we have ready, we put in for that funding. But it is a balance in terms of I I think our Section 151 officer isn't here today, so I've got her nagging in my head saying our capital commitment is already very high, and you know, for the council to be able to deliver the trajectory it's already on, you need if you were to use more capital funding, it would the financial stability of the organisation has to be taken into account as well. So it's a balance that has to be considered as part of the financial settlements and the accounts that you kind of all consider and will be considering in February in terms of the budget. So those are the kind of discussions and balance we have to take on board. But the payback of some of the interventions you can put in place is coming down all the time. So we still need to continually update that and reflect on where that balance sits. I think I've answered 2 or 3 of the questions you had. I probably missed one.
Councillor Chloe, what was your 4th?
So, a question around the PSB work and just whether there's any rumours, ideas, thoughts or plans to support funding for that territorial Powys-wide emissions reduction work. And then just the last one on partnership working around particularly procurement contracts.
Yeah, so in terms of the PSB, has been funded via Share Prosperity Fund via the council for the past 2 years. That fund ends from UK government, and Welsh government are now setting their new local growth fund criteria and how they want to take that forward. At the moment, I don't see the opportunity set out within that local growth fund to continue to support, but please also bear in mind that the PSB is made up of other partners who also have opportunities to seek funding as well. So at the moment, the funding has all come from ourselves, but I'm sure that we can put that question back to our partners as well to be able to continue that work, because we really do recognise that work has been very positive and does need to continue. So we'll be working with our partners to try and identify ways to continue that work. And then in terms of working with partners on procurement, I think I kind of teased out some of the work we've been doing with other local authorities. And I think I recognise the chair's comments about our local suppliers and not, pushing them out of the market because they haven't got the capacity to move in terms of their sustainable transformation. But I also recognise actually that many of our local suppliers have already started moving in terms of that transformation, and they have been securing grants via ourselves, via opportunities through the Share Prosperity Fund. We've been developing business grants that helps them make the transition. In terms of grant funding, there have been funding pots available. There's also been funding pots available through the Welsh Local Government Association. And I think you'd be surprised at the number of organisations that are already making the transition in terms of their vehicles, their buildings, etc. But again, I think the point, I can't remember which councillor made it, in terms of collecting all of that data and that understanding is still an area that we need to work on. Thank you. I hope I've answered all of your questions.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chloe, and thank you, Diane. Councillor Jackie's got a hand up. Did you want to come out? Yeah.
Just very quickly on the PSB, I don't think we can leave this this subject. I think it's really important that without the investment that Powys County Council made through the Shared Prosperity Fund into that pot for the work that has been undertaken for the last 2 years, none of this would have been carried forward. And I think we've made an enormous strides forward with the PSB, making sure that our partners actually understand what their responsibility is around the climate and nature emergency as well. And I think the work that Banabra Kinneog did through the working group and the team there has been absolutely excellent, very, very high class, and has given us a huge amount of information that we can work with. So we're now working again around an evidence-based process rather than just sort of making claims. We do have the evidence, and there's a huge amount of evidence there. So I think it was money really, really well spent for all of the organisations in the PSB, and I know the PSB is really keen to take these things forward. So we might not be able to fund any more the group that we had, and that money isn't available to us. But I don't think we can say that we haven't gained a huge amount from what they have done, and the learning that we've got there. And they were an incredible group of people, and they really do inspire, and they have given inspiration elsewhere. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jackie. Okay, Councillor Gary next, followed by Councillor Pete Lewington. So, Councillor Gary.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, I may do as others have done and present a few questions, so do come back to me with a bit of clarity. And I'm probably going to focus a little bit on the finances, because I think we're getting a little bit hung up on what we have got to work with and stuff. But going back to your point, Jackie, I think, yes, we all recognise that great work from the PSB, but I think what we're seeing here is how important that work still is, and how we have to try and find solutions to keep it going, because without them, we just drop off that cliff like every other one that gets grant funding does, and that's not sustainable. So I think one of our recommendations to consider will be about how we find the money to support that great work. But I just wanted to pick up on a few figures, and Adrian, you might need to come in and just help me understand some of these. Paris's current impact mapped at 95,500 tonnes a year. Significant, but nothing like the county-wide significance of our impact, which is something like 1.5 million tonnes per year. And what this report does is, from my point of view, focus too much on the small wins that Paris can or can't do, and isn't moving us quick enough towards the wider territorial stuff that we've talked about. There is a legal commitment, as far as I understand it, and I don't quite know what the implications are for local authorities and public bodies, but Welsh Government has set the legal requirement to reach net zero by 2050. And my assumption is that's for the whole of society, not just for public bodies and the bits that they do. And what this report suggests, that by 2040, we'll have done our little bit, but that's only 16% of the Paris's total emissions. So I'm just worried that, yes, we can do all of the great work that we can do internally, but we've got to focus our attention very quickly on the wider societal pressures that our businesses face and all of that sort of stuff, because they've technically got the same target, but perhaps without all of that background work that we've done. So that's something. I can see Adrian nodding, so my figures aren't horrifically far off. And then I just wanted to question us specifically on our offsetting ability. We've talked about it briefly here, haven't we? We've got a sort of plan that says we'll do what we can internally, we'll work with that great work around the supply chain, and we should champion that because it is great. And we know it's bringing benefits in, and we know other authorities are doing it. And then we move into that offsetting 30% sector that is a real challenge. I would suggest we don't do that at all. And if we look at page 37, the table there, to me, and this is where I will need checking my own maths. Figure 3.2, although the table above it references figure 6, which I can't find anywhere. So I'm assuming that should reference figure 3.2. But if we look at 2025 in figure 3.2, what we're saying is roughly 92,000 tonnes of emissions. If we wanted to offset those through greenwashing, let's be honest about it, but carbon planting, carbon capture, whatever, it would only cost us £11.7 million. Now, I would argue, Adrian, I don't know if it was yourself or anyone that put the figures in there, but that's over £70 per tonne. And I would argue, from my limited knowledge, that is absolutely the top end of carbon offsetting costs and could be delivered much more. So what I'm suggesting is that figure, to me, shows that if we wanted to be carbon neutral as a local authority in year, I get that, so you still have the same emissions, you've got to pay it again next year, it would cost us £11 million at most. But what we absolutely know from the research is that we're always going to need 30% of offsetting. So why don't we up front invest that money, because we know we're going to need it to get anywhere near it. So you're reducing that carbon target, if you like, by 30% straight away with money. And if it's only, I'm guessing now, but anyway, a third of that cost, we've just had £17 million in for bridges and tarmac, and we're investing it in bridges and tarmac, not carbon offsetting. I know the grants are tied up in all sorts of things, but that just doesn't make sensible maths to me, we've got to invest now whilst we can to reduce that. So that was one point, and I don't know if I'll pause there quickly just so that Adrian or anyone can come in and challenge me on that should they wish.
Okay, I think Adrian is nodding there, so would you like to come in? And...
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, happy to pick up that. So the first point about the effectiveness of Paris County Council taking action on its own emissions in regard to the rather larger total for Paris as a territorial area. You're right in the sense that the direct impact of taking action on the council's own emissions will have a limited impact on achieving that 2050 Welsh Government target. But, and it's quite a big but, there is a lot of research that demonstrates quite conclusively that particularly local authorities can have a much more widespread impact on the general performance of the areas which they administer through, for example, supply chain considerations, and that's, you know, I mean, I haven't worked out the percentage, but generally speaking, a local authority's direct impact on territorial emissions is a few percentage points. But the wider impact that a council can exert can be as much as a third of total emissions for that area. And therefore, taking action in the way that the route map recommends actually is likely to drive some significant improvement. And Diane referenced earlier the issue about a lot of suppliers are already engaged in this agenda and are being supported through business grants and so on to achieve those sorts of outcomes. There is a lot of momentum, and I don't know the position in Paris directly because I don't geographically work in Paris currently, but I do work in the West Midlands and in Shropshire, and I can tell you from my own experience that even really quite small companies are now engaged in this agenda and are taking direct action and doing carbon literacy and all the other things that are involved in order to drive down their carbon emissions, and that pressure is coming from their clients very often. We will see momentum building to the point where even really quite small companies who you might not traditionally associate with taking action on this agenda are actually doing so, supported, for example, by the companies who work with them. So that was the first point. The second point about offsetting, yes, it is possible to buy cheaper offsets than those which have been used to calculate the figures in the route map. However, there are some significant caveats around doing that. and I'll give you as an example the fact that British Airways got into really big trouble over using cheap carbon offsets to claim that its performance was better than it was. And it was subsequently proven that those carbon offsets were bluntly not worth the paper they were written on. And not just British Airways, but a number of companies have fallen foul of this and have actually had to go right back to the beginning and spend really quite significant amounts of money to dig themselves out of the problems that they got into by taking that approach. Therefore, the route map doesn't assume carbon emissions can be offset with those kind of cheaper opportunities, but rather that if you're going to do it and you're going to value it, then it should be on the basis of something which is verifiable and a higher quality around which we can all have much more confidence. But that is just the benchmark. The point where Paris Council has a huge advantage over most large organisations is that you have a very large land estate. And that presents all sorts of opportunities which might not be available to other organisations, in the sense that you can, and you are, as far as I'm aware, actively engaged in exploring how those emissions could be offset, not only for Paris County Council as an organisation, but potentially for other local organisations who might wish to buy offsets from you as a form of income or revenue. And there is potential for that, which needs to be explored further. I'm aware from what Daniel said earlier that that is work which is currently going on. So the other thing about offsetting, do you do it now? Do you do it later? Yes, absolutely. Start and do what you can. But I would say that work needs to start with what you can do in-house. Don't just go out and spend loads of money, particularly in the current budget context, on something which you could be doing on your own estate. I'm not sure that would be justifiable. And also, there's a lot of learning to be gained from that and a lot of benefit potentially to other landowners, bearing in mind the size of the agricultural sector in Paris. You know, what might other landowners and farmers particularly learn from your experience in terms of how that is managed and what potential revenue or other benefits it could generate? Because there is growth in this. It's not all bad news. There's some major challenges, but there is also potentially growth in this. And I think those opportunities are tremendous potentially, and you can lead by example, which is absolutely the role of a local authority to do that and demonstrate how this might work in practice. So I hope I picked those couple of points from Councillor Gary.
Yep, thank you. And I think it absolutely makes sense to spend our carbon credit money within Paris and on our own estate first. Of course it does, and to involve our neighbours and our local businesses in doing so. So yeah, absolutely, and we can make some recommendations around that. I guess then just quickly, sort of staying on the same theme really, the report shows some amazing returns on investments in the school estate on solar LED. 2.5 year payback, I think I picked up in one of the pages. That's phenomenal. Surely we have to move away from that. We need to find a grant to do it, blah, blah, blah. And I know Liz and others, you've mentioned it. That money is borrowable and it's then easily banked, isn't it? It's a no-brainer. If you're getting a return on an investment in less than 7 years through a loan, surely that needs to be just championed, and our whole estate should be moved in a direction to get it closer to net zero, particularly the schools that are older buildings and been underinvested in for years. So that's just a general comment to make. And then perhaps I've got a couple of points then in what the report reference. One that I just need to pick up sort of on behalf of my constituents really, and feel I wouldn't do it justice if I didn't. Page 27, bullet point, is it 4 or 5, IV, talks about the local area energy plan that we've seen, but this report references an interesting line that says Paris can easily meet its own energy production targets, but it should also do it for the wider UK that possibly can't. That sort of statement in this report worries me a little bit with the impact of energy parks that we've got on communities and stuff, and I'm just disappointed that it's in here as a report that's actually around that energy is just one element of it all. But there we go, I'll just make that point. And then it references a report that I'm not sure we've seen, but it might just be miswording. So it references a report on the renewable and low carbon energy assessment, which was completed in 2024. I'm not sure, and I may just have missed it, and I've dropped off the Climate and Nature Steering Group relatively recently. But if that's not one of the report packs that we've seen as members, can I ask that we see that one and we find it, and or we tidy up the reference in this one, because I can't see a direct reference to that one. And I think you'll be pleased to know that's my last question for now, but I might well come in at the end as I often do, Angela. Thank you.
You're on mute.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. I keep knocking myself onto mute. Yeah, so who would like to pick those points up there for Gary? Councillor Gary. Diane, thank you.
I'm not sure that they were kind of questions that we can answer within this session. I note the query around the schools kind of element, and we can take that as a recommendation, Chair, should you wish to. So, but it was something we'll take back anyway and consider and put the business case together. And I know we have been working on those business cases anyway behind the scenes, trying to work out how we can block different schools together, because obviously if you have to do a feasibility, as I was talking about, for everyone, that's very hard. In terms of the report being made available, of course, we can make that available. I think it's a publicly available report through the, I think it's through Grow Mid Wales, but I'll double check that after with the team. I think that was the questions that I had noted.
Okay. Lovely. Well, I mean, on the one, just to extend from what Councillor Gary said there about the school estates, in the care home one, it shows us that a 708,000 spend on a 5-year payback would get 8% CO2 reduction. So, you know, I think the questions could be, have these been implemented and why not? And how can we do that? As you say, sometimes a spend to save has surely got to be something that's worth investigating further. Right, okay, so I've got Councillor Peter Lewington, Councillor Corinna, and then Councillor Sean. So, Councillor Pete, with you.
Thank you very much, Chair. It was just sort of question, comment, I guess, under the headings of sort of joined up approach, engagement in influencing others. Section 5.1 of the report sort of talks about Powys County Council property estate, and then 5.2 talks about fabric improvements in buildings. I was just wondering if we have thought through fully sort of how our existing policies and approaches impact across the private sector and could possibly be updated to influence behaviour without us needing to actually be directly involved. So I guess if I just give one example to try and say what I'm trying to get at is one in relation to housing for me is I get lots of complaints around replacement UPVC windows in conservation areas. Now, I believe sort of like the double glazing is a carbon reduction opportunity as well as helping residents with their costs. And so therefore I just wondered that would be an example of, say, looking at our approach to this type of planning issue in conservation areas, but I didn't know if there was other policies and things like that that we could also bring in this to have a look at, which could give us some, I guess, quick and cheap wins, really. You're on mute again, Chair.
Apologies. Yeah, I think you raised some really good points there about making sure that we get our own house in order, isn't it, in regard to all our council policies, to make sure that we're enabling this work to happen and not by some default or historical reason putting up barriers. So,
Yeah.
Diane, you've got your hand up there.
Yes, it's some of the areas that Councillor questions are within our control and some not within our control. So if you talk about built heritage, that's set nationally, but if you talk about some of the other planning policies, obviously they can be covered in our local development plan. And we are actually actively looking at all of our planning policies at the moment whilst we redo our local development plan over the next couple of years. So we have looked at many of those policies and looked at them within the commitments that we've made within our corporate strategic equality plan to ensure that they do support delivery of that, and obviously climate and nature being part of that as well. So we have had different working groups. I think some of you may have been part of those as well, trying to look at how those policies support those aspirations. And we've also got to bear in mind that the market has also got to mature to develop with us. So whilst we might aspire to having many green investments in housing, for instance, such as air source heat pumps, we haven't actually got the engineers available to install them or maintain them. So our skills gap doesn't meet our kind of aspiration as well at the moment. So whilst we might intend to do a lot of work in retrofit in many of our buildings, we haven't got the workforce or the businesses to do that at the moment. And many businesses that are wider just cost us so much more. So we have to build that kind of economy piece with it, and that's set out within the skills and the business aspects within our new economic strategy. So I think it's a kind of whole piece, isn't it? We can't look at it through one lens. We've got to look at it through multiple lenses and try and bring all of those elements up together at the same time.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. Okay, so I've got 3 more questioners, Councillor Corinna, Councillor Sean and Councillor Gary. I'm just doing a time check. We're at 12 o'clock, so we're sort of heading for 15:15 to finish this, and I don't feel we've really given it full justice, although I think we've had quite a good go this morning so far. So we'll crack on with Councillor Corinna, please.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, people have said, a lot of stuff. I would have definitely support Councillor Gary with his recommendation to try and find future funding for the PSB group, particularly the staff that are currently employed, to look at our territorial emissions. And also Councillor Chloe saying, analysing what's gone wrong. I wonder if it's almost like looking under the bonnet, is it to do with linking thematic boards to action plans and that sort of thing? Could that be firmed up? And I wondered what happened to the stakeholder group. We haven't seen that for a bit. I'm also going to ask a naive question about our the farms. So Adrian says we are in a unique position as a county in having access to all this land, which we could possibly use for carbon emissions. But I thought that the tenants of our farms had a priority there. And finally, thinking about the schools, surely there are community or other initiatives which could put solar panels on roofs. In my area, just up the road from me, big solar co-op in Bucknell. I don't know if anybody would like to answer that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Corinna. Yeah, Councillor Jackie's got a hand up. Thank you, Councillor Jackie.
Just to come back quickly on the stakeholder group, we have tried on more than one occasion to set up a stakeholder group. It did start off quite well, and this was in 2023, and we did have members of that stakeholder group. But as we move forward, we found that it was really difficult to sort of incorporate all those ideas into the way we were moving. So we then handed that responsibility over to the PSB, because they've got far more stakeholders than we have, and that you did get that territorial impact. I'm not quite sure where it is with the PSB, so that might be a question that we'd like to put to the PSB in future. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Corinna, what were your other questions? Sorry, I've lost my thread a bit there.
I can come in if it helps.
Daniel's got his hand up. Yeah, please do come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Certainly in terms of the local energy, I'm really pleased to say that actually with the WSRID funding that's underway currently here in Mid Wales, we've got a number of successful projects taking shape. The feasibility of those is due to finish at the end of the financial year. And we've had some really positive feedback to date on those projects. I think it was 5 sites all across Powys selected. An example of one would be Llanidloes, where actually we looked at shared community spaces with the cricket club, for example, and some of the residents. And then Energy Hub then is looking at creating a micro power plant, is how they're wording it, in terms of the energy created in that community and stored in that community is then used by those residents first, and any excess then is sold back onto the grid. So that project really is up and running and coming along nicely. So much so actually there's some commercial interest in that, which is really good.
Oh no, just specifically about schools. I think and solar.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, schools. There's a greater degree of autonomy with some of those decisions around their estates, but I know we are behind the scenes working on some joint projects with schools, so that is taking shape, and that will be coming out, I think, in the next few months on that study. Again, it's a point that's raised by Councillor, I think Gary mentioned earlier, about the cost sometimes involved. Is those models need to be looked at. I think you did also make a point, Councillor, on the farm estate as well, so I'm happy to cover that off as well, Chair, if you'd like. So
yes, please, Daniel. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I think it's been touched upon a couple of times today, just so everyone is aware, we are currently undertaking a feasibility exercise on our estate, not just the farming estate. That includes obviously our playing fields, our forestry, everything really. What's the art of the possible with that when it comes to our tackling climate change? And one of those questions we've asked that work to look at and understand actually what is the situation around those that carbon sequestration linked to a tenant or another owner of that land, for example. I don't think it's quite as straightforward as we believe it is. So we're just trying to get our heads on that currently.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Crinner. Okay, so I've got 3 more hands up, Councillor Sean, Councillor Gary and Councillor Adrian. But if you don't mind, members, I'm going to go to Councillor Adrian first, as he hasn't spoken yet, then Councillor Sean, and we'll end on our Vice Chair, Councillor Gary. Unless any other members of the committee who haven't spoken yet, I'm just checking my list. Councillor Bryan. Councillor Bryan's with us. If you wanted to add anything, put your hand up now and I'll bring you in before the end. So we'll go now to Councillor Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about in 2035, we've got 30% that needs offsetting of carbon. What's that include? Is that stuck or is that stuff that we haven't been able to do, or what's the 30% include? That's basically what I'm asking.
Okay. Diane.
I think I'll give a couple of clear examples and trying to relate them to your everyday kind of life. In terms of your own house, you might put solar panels on your house, and you might be able to you might live in a stone house where you can't actually put insulation in your house. So actually that you cannot get that down to zero, that building down to zero. So we'd have many buildings across our estate. And also within things like vehicles, there might be many vehicles that we can run on electric. And we're having just completed the first phase of a study at the moment to look at that conversion. But our big vehicles that run quite a lot of miles, big heavy vehicles, they're not possible at the moment. It's not possible to convert those to electric, and other sources of fuel aren't sustainable at the moment. So it might be by the time we get to that point that some developments have happened in new technology or new fuels, etc., that will mean that 30% isn't that high and we're able to transition more, or it might mean that we have to offset them. I'm hoping that gives you a good couple of examples, but I did see Adrian put his hand up as well, so he might have something better examples than I gave.
Yeah, Adrian Cooper, did you want to add?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, yes, Diane is absolutely correct. The percentage figure which the route map has adopted comes from established good practice, which is that it's generally held that it is impossible to reach absolute zero. In other words, no organisation can actually get to a point where it has no net emissions at all, just because technologically and in other ways it's really not achievable. And the benchmark of 70% reductions and therefore a 30% residual is widely adopted in the business world. That's where that's come from. But as Diane has suggested, there will always be some things. Powys County Council is a large, complex organisation with a whole raft of different challenges on this agenda. And there will be stuff where it's simply not cost effective or where no technology currently exists to actually deliver that net zero outcome. And do bear in mind, we're talking about net zero. It is net zero, not absolute zero that we're talking about. And the net zero really reflects the fact that you've got a degree of offsetting involved.
Right. So thank you for that. My concern is the time scale, because we've got lots and lots of buildings, and I see in the pack the cost and this, that, and the other, and some aren't viable to even do. So I would put it to you that probably that 30% is going to be even higher, or we need a longer time scale. Because you can't put a heat pump in an old Victorian school, for example. That'd be silly. It just wouldn't work. That would be an example of what you're saying. There's going to be some offsetting needed there. Stay with oil, until a new building gets put up. So you're not going to suddenly put all new schools up, new leisure centres, etc., etc. So by 2035, which will come, it's only 9 years now, we really, really cannot get to a decent level, really, I wouldn't have thought. So that 30% could be a lot higher.
I mean, it's possible, but I would suggest to you that the pace of technological change is enormous, and even older buildings are now perfectly possible to retrofit. It's not to say that it's always cost effective to do so, but that does, of course, depend upon the costs involved. What happens if the price of oil goes sky high and the price of renewable electricity drops like a stone, which is what should happen in the longer term, depending. Then in that case, your operational costs for running a heat pump are negligible because they're very, very efficient. I don't want to sound too much like a kind of soapbox item or a zealot, but just to give you an example, my elderly mother lives in a 1960s bungalow, which has just had the full conversion without any additional insulation measures. And it's currently costing her less than £30 a month to run. On fully electric heating and everything else. Okay, so it can be done. I'm not saying that a Victorian school with solid stone walls is necessarily a prime prospect, but it can be done. There are technological solutions for many of these things, but the point is, I think, about recognizing the residual need for offsetting, that it's unlikely that there will be a technological solution as yet, anyway, for everything. So I would maintain that 30% is a reasonable benchmark to choose at this point, and obviously it may require updating in future if technology changes or the costs of operating different forms of energy also change.
Thank you. Well, what we need then really is the government to step in, generate cheap electric through nuclear power, and then we can put heat pumps everywhere and just let them run. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Adrian. So I'm going to bring in Councillor Bryan now, but members of the committee, can I ask you to look in the Zoom chat? We've been trying to collate your recommendations as the meeting's gone through. It's quite wordy, so if you can have a read so we can quickly sum up. And just give you another time check. It is now on 12:12, but we got Councillor Bryan, Councillor Sean and Councillor Gary. And really, we're running out of time, and that's a good thing, because members, that means you've been engaged with lots of questions and we've had lots of in-depth answers, so that's a really positive thing, but frustrating because I'm sure we could go on for hours, but as I say, we have to finish at 12:30 today. So Councillor Bryan, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is just a general comment. I think we started at the meeting saying that we're engaging with town and community councils. Well, I attend 5 rural community councils and I haven't seen anything about community climate change coming out to them. Similar to the sustainable powers. You know, when I go to the community councils, all they talk about mainly is potholes, recycling, planning, and that's it. To engage them, I think somehow we need to get them on board, because I'm not seeing anything coming from Powys. If I am, I'm missing it. Sorry. I'm glad to hear that.
That's very pertinent, Brian, because one of the recommendations I've added in the chat, we talked about having some member development for officers and staff, and I've asked, could we add to that, and town and community councils, because I think it's useful if everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet and we all work together, isn't it? So you raise a very good point. Thank you for that.
I'm glad to hear that we're involving, hopefully, the Trunk Road Agency, because the public of Powys think that's Powys, and obviously we got no control on where they do anything from. And they are doing a tremendous amount of work lately around this ward anyway. Powys Teaching Health Board, obviously I hope we're engaging with those, because obviously there's a tremendous amount of, I'm off to a meeting with the Bills Community Trust support now, and we're struggling to supply all the transport because there doesn't seem to be a link to any of the outside hospitals. So obviously it needs to be some sort of methodology or mention about climate change into that. And that's just been mainly my general comments.
Thank you, Brian. I think you raised really important points there, and I know Councillor Jackie, you've done a lot of work, haven't you, on community transport and public transport and how that all links into this. But yeah, really good points, Councillor Brian. Thank you for that. Okay, Councillor Sean and then Councillor Gary. So I'm really sorry, but we do need to be as brief as we can now to get these in. But thank you, Councillor Sean.
Yes, I've got a question and a request. So my question is in 2.13 of the route map. It talks about good practice already happening in some services. And then it says a focus on project-based grant funding and short-term revenue savings has limited the wider impact of the action. So my question is, are officers, two questions really, are officers under pressure to promote measures that reduce emissions, but at the same time bring in revenue savings as a result? And is that getting in the way of them doing what they actually know is really necessary, or constraining their ability to do that? And if so, how do we address that in the action plans going forward? And my request is that, you know, there's been focus on the fact that the target is achievable, subject to staff and budget resources, and there's been mention of the fact that we have had 3 dedicated climate officers, plus we've had lots of transformational funding and SPF funding going into this work. So how can we have confidence that the measures going forward, and the investment we make in staff going forward will have the results that we need? So my request is, could we be provided with a report that sets out the total level of expenditure so far, so on staff and transformation and SPF, etc., to date, what it's been used for and what's been achieved with it, and then what's required to achieve this route map going forward, and why we think it'll work.
Thank you, Councillor Sean. Diane, hand went straight up there, so over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think you will find the majority of that information in the Climate and Nature Steering Group annual report that was produced last year, that looked at all of the work that we had completed. And I don't think it necessarily added cost in theirs, but we could add that to it. And I think the Climate and Nature Steering Group are at the moment designing what their next year's report will look like. And I'm sure that they will take it on board, those comments as well. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Sean. Yeah, thank you. Lovely. Okay, Councillor Jackie.
Yeah, I just wanted to reinforce what Diane has just said about the annual report. We have a working group which has been set up now to look at how we make a much more easily readable annual report this year. It was the first one we did last year. We know there were not mistakes in it, but we know that it wasn't the best public facing report ever. But I'm sure that we can sort of include those kinds of comments into the annual report this year.
Thank you, Councillor Jackie. And so, Councillor Sean, your hand is still up. Is that okay? Okay, lovely. Thank you very much for that. Councillor Gary, to round up then for us today.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's good to see this sort of strategy emerging. I will say, I think probably on behalf of many of the Scrutiny Committee here, it's taken us a while to get there. And we are 4 or 5 years in of this journey, and we know that that's pushed us back, so we've got to get the momentum going and moving forward. I think the last point I wanted to make is we as a council have quite a strong influence on a lot of significant amounts of money coming into our region through the joint councils, growth deal money, levelling up money, transformation money, transformational towns money, local growth deal, whatever's coming out of Westminster. And I think just that urgency to ensure that all of the projects that we are scrutinising and scoring and putting forward for potential multi-million pounds worth of funding have that climate first focus in them. And if they haven't, we shouldn't be funding them. Got to be honest with you. We know the problem. We know it's going to be really challenging to fix, and we know that we haven't got enough money to do it. So where we have leverage over money, we absolutely have to be using our strongest influence to say, yes, we want economic growth and tourism impacts and things like that, but only if it's going to improve our climate position, not make it worse. So some sort of recommendation in there around how scoring is changed on some of those larger, very significant projects that we have some influence over. Acknowledge we don't have all of the influence over some of the joint working ones, but we are an equal partner in them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So members, what I'll do now, if you can see the Zoom chat, our proposed recommendations are there. I need to read them out, so bear with me. I'll read them out and see if you're happy to take them en masse or if you want to make any amendments to them. And I can see Sean's added a couple, so I'll read those as well. So starting at the top, I'll read it from the same chat, so we're following them together. Just bring mine, they're in slightly different order here. Okay, so this is starting at number 5 for some reason, but let's go with it. When embedding climate requirements into procurement, ensure these do not disproportionately disadvantage small local businesses, so balancing climate ambition with local economic impact. For schools and care homes, assess whether loan-financed energy efficiency upgrades, e.g. solar insulation, LED, can be delivered now and where the financial savings justify borrowing rather than waiting for grant opportunities. Undertake a look under the bonnet review to understand barriers or delays in delivery, including clearer linkage between thematic boards and actionable implementation plans. Clarify the future use and expectations for PCC farmland, including the balance between tenant priorities and the potential for carbon or offsetting projects. Explore opportunities for community-led partnership initiatives to install rooftop solar on school buildings, etc. Convene a dedicated workshop for both Powys County Council councillors and staff, and extend that to town and community councils to build that shared understanding, alignment and collective ownership of the climate programme. Yeah. That the net zero route map, together with all the relevant supporting and supplementary information, be brought forward for consideration at a dedicated member development session to ensure all elected members are fully briefed and able to engage with its implications. Refocus the programme towards reducing territorial emissions across Powys rather than concentrating solely on the Council's 16% corporate share. Develop an early Powys-based carbon offsetting strategy, making use of council land and involving local partners. And explore the case for upfront investment in unavoidable offsetting rather than postponing these costs until later years. And where offsetting will be required, run offsetting projects in parallel with other decarbonisation work to avoid pushing back the target dates. And then adding to that, continue to try to ensure the PSB work continues and look at linking the thematic boards to the action plans. Have I missed any? I'm just going down the chat box, bear with me. Councillor Gary, update funding appraisal and scoring framework so only proposals with demonstrable positive climate impact and no negative effect are recommended for external investment, and apply this consistently across all major programmes the council influences. Right, and I think the final one, we did talk about asking the council to look internally at all its policies and procedures to ensure that they enable these acts to happen and that they don't have unintended barriers to progress. So members, a lot to take in there, but we've had a very active meeting. Councillor Gary, comment?
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Angela. Put one in at the end as well. We talked about it at the beginning that we would probably recommend that this be presented through a full members briefing as well, because we're only a small
Yeah, that was in there, number 11.
Oh, it was it? Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. So members, are we, Councillor Peter?
That was a very bad there.
Oh, here's another one. No, please. Want to make sure everybody has had their say. This is important work. It's really
absolutely
important.
Absolutely right. Yeah. No, thank you for the one on the policies. That was one. I just wondered the bit around whether the KPIs could include where we've made choices. And you know, so we've decided to invest in that. Did that have any impact on services?
Okay, yep, we can word that in as well. So members, are you happy with those as our recommendations? We may twiggle the wording about a little bit, the officers, Gary and myself. Councillor Shan, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had the same trouble reading all of them 1 to 11 because the chat was only giving you 3 or 4 at the same time. So I think I might have missed some, but there was a lot of concern, wasn't there, in this meeting about the ending of the funding for the PSB team. And
yeah, that one is in there about the PSB.
It is there, is it? Okay, lovely, thank you.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, are we happy to take them en masse as our recommendations? Yeah, yeah, can we have some hands up? Lovely, that's great. Okay, Gemma.
Perfect,
Lovely.
thank you, Chair.
Thank
So
you.
I've got 14 in total, including those ones that you mentioned, Councillor Shan.
Lovely. Okay, I just want to say to the committee, I probably should have said early on, we got Councillor Jeremy Brignall Thorpe here as an observer, and I was hoping to be able to bring Jeremy in to speak to us, but I'm sorry, Jeremy, we've run out of time. But I hope that you and officers have found this session helpful. I think we would have liked more time really to have it, and perhaps that member development, had that come first, that would have been useful. But I hope that we've done it justice and that you're at least relatively happy as chair of the Nature and Climate Group. So now, members, that was item 8, then the scrutiny recommendations. Our next meeting is the 18th of February. We've got our pre-meeting in the morning and the main meeting in the afternoon. So if anybody has the 17th of February in their diary, please delete it. That meeting was changed, so there. And then following this, we will have our committee reflections. So I just want to thank you all. It was a lot of paperwork, but I think you've surprised me, and I don't mean that rudely, because I know it was a lot to take in and I wasn't sure how we were going to manage this, but hopefully, as I say, I hope that's been useful to our officers and members. Councillor Jackie, would you, as portfolio holder, would you like to have the final word before we close the meeting?
Yes, please. I'd be very grateful for that. The first thing I wanted to say is a big thank you for the way that you discussed this meeting at the beginning to get it into an open session. I think that was a very productive few minutes spent, and I'm really pleased that we were able to do this in public session. But just to say that the route map is a point in time. This is a starting point. It's going to be a very flexible report over the next few years, and the Climate and Nature Steering Group will be the place where most of this will be discussed, and a steer will be given to the authority through that group. So just wanted to say a big thank you to everybody. It's been a very, very interesting conversation. Recommendations are excellent. We can take all of those. I think we can answer some of them already anyway, but it's really, really good to have some of those recommendations there, and very, very grateful to everybody for having such a constructive meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jackie. Okay, members, it's 12:27. We've got 3 minutes if you want to just stay online for our committee reflection. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank you, Adrian Cooper, to our portfolio holders, and to all our directors and staff. Thank you, Jeremy, for sitting in on the meeting, and thank you to all the committee members for all your work this morning. Thank you all. Have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, I'll let you know when we are no longer live.